I loved a man who never even knew I existed, until the night he decided I belonged to him. The rain started just after midnight, soft at first, like a whisper against the glass, then heavier, steady, turning the long driveway outside the DeLuca estate into a mirror of trembling lights. I stood under the edge of the stone archway, just out of reach of the downpour, my fingers curled tightly around the thin fabric of my coat as if it could hold me together. 7 years. That's how long I had been here. Not inside his world, not really, but close enough to feel it breathe. Close enough to learn the rhythm of his footsteps without ever hearing my name in his voice. Victor DeLuca didn't notice people like me. Men stepped aside when he entered a room. Women lowered their voices. Conversations paused mid-sentence, like the air itself needed permission to continue. And me? I blended into the background. A shadow in a house built on power and silence. I told myself that was enough. That watching from a distance didn't hurt. That memorizing the way he adjusted his cufflinks or paused before speaking was just habit. Not longing. Never longing. The front doors opened with a quiet precision that echoed louder than thunder in my chest. I didn't need to look to know it was him. There was a shift in the atmosphere, subtle but undeniable, like gravity tilting toward a single point. I lowered my eyes anyway. That had always been the rule. Don't look too long. Don't exist too loudly. Don't make him notice you. His footsteps moved across the marble floor behind me, measured, controlled. Each one deliberate. Each one closer. I should have walked away. I should have disappeared the way I always did. But my feet didn't move. The rain blurred the world beyond the gates, turning everything into something distant and unreachable. And for a second, just one, I let myself pretend I wasn't invisible. That maybe, he knew. A car engine started somewhere behind him. Voices followed, low and respectful, fading as quickly as they came. But he didn't leave. The silence stretched. Heavy. Watching. I felt it before I heard it, the pause in his step, the shift in direction. Toward me. My breath. Caught. No. Not toward me. Anyone but me. I kept my gaze fixed on the rain, counting seconds like they could protect me. 1. 2. 3. Then his voice, low and calm, cut through the night. You've been standing here for a long time. My heart stopped. Not slowed. Not raced. Stopped. Because he wasn't speaking to the air. He was speaking to me. I turned, slowly, like the movement itself might shatter something fragile. And there he was. Closer than he had ever been. Close enough that I could see the faint silver at his temples, the sharp line of his jaw, the eyes that had ruled an entire city without ever raising their voice. His gaze held mine, not passing over, not dismissing. Holding. Studying. Like I was something he couldn't immediately define. I swallowed, the sound too loud in my ears. I was just leaving, I said, my voice softer than I intended, almost lost beneath the rain. A lie. I had nowhere to go. His eyes didn't move. Didn't blink. No, he said quietly. Not harsh. Not angry. Just certain. You weren't. The space between us felt smaller suddenly, like the world had folded inward. I should have stepped back. I didn't. Because for the first time in 7 years, Victor DeLuca was looking at me like I wasn't invisible anymore. And something in my chest, something dangerous, refused to let me run. His certainty did not sound like a challenge. It sounded like a fact that had already been decided long before I opened my mouth to deny it. I felt it settle into the space between us, heavy and inescapable, like the rain that refused to stop. I should have looked away. I did not. That was my first mistake. Or maybe it was my first truth. Because for years, I had been careful. Careful not to exist where he could see me. Careful not to let my eyes linger. Careful not to let anything slip that might reveal the quiet, impossible thing I had carried inside me. But standing there, under the dim lights and the endless rain, I forgot how to be careful. His gaze moved over me slowly, not in the way men usually looked at women, not assessing, not dismissing, but searching, like he was trying to place me in a memory that did not quite fit. It made my pulse unsteady. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, but closer now. Too close. I could feel the shift in the air every time he stepped forward, like the world adjusted itself to make room for him. I swallowed. 7 years. The number felt too big when I said it out loud. Too revealing. Something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise. Something sharper. 7, he repeated, almost to himself. His gaze dropped briefly, as if considering that fact, then returned to mine with a focus that made it hard to breathe. "And I have never seen you before." It was not a question. It was an observation. One that landed harder than it should have. I forced a small breath, steadying myself. I am not someone people usually notice. Another truth. One I had learned early and accepted without argument. But something in his expression changed at that. Subtle. Almost invisible. His jaw tightened just slightly, like he did not agree. Like he refused the idea entirely. "That is not the same thing," he said quietly. The words were simple. The meaning was not. My fingers tightened around my coat again, grounding myself in something familiar, something safe. This was not safe. None of this was. The rain grew heavier, tapping against the stone with a steady rhythm that felt too loud, too close. And still, he did not move away. Neither did I. "Why are you here?" he asked after a moment. Not suspicious. Not accusing. Just direct. Always direct. I hesitated. There were 1,000 answers I could have given. None of them true. I could say I needed air. That I was waiting for someone. That I had simply lost track of time. But his eyes were still on mine, unwavering, and something told me he would hear the lie before I finished it. So I chose something closer to the truth. I could not sleep. His gaze did not soften. But it shifted. Slightly. Enough that I noticed. Enough that it mattered. "And standing in the rain helps?" he asked. There was something almost quiet in the question. Not mocking. Not gentle. Just curious. I shook my head once, a small movement. No. Another pause. Another silence that stretched just long enough to matter. Then he stepped closer. Not enough to touch. But enough that I could feel the warmth of him through the cold air, enough that every instinct I had built over 7 years screamed at me to step back. I did not. Because running now would mean losing this moment. And I had waited too long for it to exist. "Then why are you still here?" he asked softly. My heart pounded so hard it felt impossible that he could not hear it. This was it. The edge of something I had never allowed myself to reach. I could still step back. Still disappear. Still become invisible again. Instead, I lifted my chin just slightly, meeting his gaze fully for the first time without hesitation. And I said the one thing I had never said out loud before. "Because you are." The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged. Alive. And for the first time since I had known him, Victor DeLuca did not look like a man who had all the answers. He looked like a man who had just been given a question he could not ignore. And I knew, in that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. The words hung between us like something fragile and irreversible, and I felt the exact moment they reached him, the exact second they settled into his understanding, because his expression did not change but the air around him did, tightening, sharpening, like a door had quietly closed behind me without a sound. He did not speak right away, and somehow that was worse than any immediate response could have been, because silence from a man like Victor DeLuca was never empty, it was measured, deliberate, filled with decisions being made that you could not see until it was too late to walk away. His eyes stayed on mine, not harsh, not soft, just present in a way that made it impossible to breathe normally, and I realized with a slow, sinking awareness that I had crossed something invisible, a line I had spent 7 years carefully avoiding. Because I am, he repeated, not questioning, not mocking, just confirming that he had heard me exactly as I meant it, and the calm in his voice made my pulse stumble harder than anger ever could. I should have taken it back. I should have laughed it off, turned it into something small, something forgettable, but I did not. Because for the first time, I did not want to disappear. He took another step closer, and this time the distance between us was almost gone, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the presence of him in a way that had nothing to do with space and everything to do with control. My instinct told me to move. My feet stayed still. That is not an answer people give by accident, he said quietly, and there was something different in his tone now, something more focused, like he had shifted from observing to understanding, and that was somehow more dangerous. I shook my head once, barely a movement. It was not an accident. Another silence, shorter this time, sharper. His gaze did not leave my face, as if he was reading something written beneath the surface, something I had never intended anyone to see. 7 years, he said again, slower now, like he was placing each piece exactly where it belonged. You stand in my house. You move through my world. And you tell me you are here because of me. My breath caught, but I did not look away. Yes. The word was quiet, but it did not waver. Something shifted again, deeper this time, not in his expression but in the stillness of him, like he had reached a conclusion that changed the way he saw everything in front of him. His hand lifted slightly, not touching me, just hovering for a fraction of a second before lowering again, controlled, deliberate, like even that small movement had been considered and restrained. And you expected me not to notice, he said, and this time there was the faintest edge in his voice, not anger, but something closer to disbelief. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. You never did. The truth landed between us, simple and undeniable. For a moment, something unreadable passed through his eyes, something that did not belong to the man everyone else saw, something quieter, more human, and gone almost as quickly as it appeared. The rain continued to fall around us, steady, relentless, but neither of us moved, as if the world beyond that space had stopped mattering. Then he stepped forward, just enough to remove the last inch of distance, and for the first time in my life, I felt what it meant to be fully seen by him, not as part of the background, not as something passing, but as something he had chosen to focus on. Not anymore, he said softly, and there was no hesitation in it, no doubt, just certainty that settled into my chest like something permanent. My heart raced, not from fear, not entirely, but from the realization that this moment, this single shift in his attention, had changed everything I thought I understood about my place in his world. Because Victor DeLuca was not a man who noticed things by accident. And now, he had noticed me. The certainty in his voice did not fade. It settled. It stayed. And I felt it press against my ribs like something that would not let me breathe the same way again. Not anymore. The words echoed in my mind, quieter each time, but heavier, like they were rewriting something I had spent years convincing myself was safe. Invisible had been safe. Invisible had been simple. This was neither. I should have stepped back. That instinct returned, stronger now, sharper, telling me that whatever this was, it was no longer something I could control. But my body did not listen. Or maybe it did, and chose differently. Because part of me had always wondered what it would feel like to be seen by him like this. Not in passing. Not by accident. Fully. Deliberately. His gaze had not softened. It had focused. That was the difference. And it made every second stretch longer than it should have. "You should not be standing out here," he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. It was not a suggestion. It was not concern, not exactly. It was something closer to expectation. I let out a small breath, the cold air brushing against my skin as the rain continued to fall just inches away. I have been doing it for years. Another truth. Another mistake. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation, like every answer I gave him was becoming part of something larger in his mind. "That does not make it right," he replied. "Right." The word felt out of place coming from him. Not because he did not understand it, but because men like Victor DeLuca did not usually need it. They decided what was right. I glanced toward the rain, then back at him, unable to hold his gaze for too long without feeling like I was giving away something I could not take back. It was never meant to be right. Silence again. But this time it was different. Not heavy. Not uncertain. It felt like something shifting into place. He studied me for a long second, and I realized he was no longer trying to understand why I was here. He already knew. He was deciding what to do about it. That realization sent a quiet wave of unease through me, not fear, not panic, but awareness. This was the moment where everything changed direction. "Emily," he said, and the sound of my name in his voice made my heart stutter in a way I could not control. He knew my name. Of course he did. He knew everything. And yet hearing it like that felt different. Personal. Intentional. I lifted my eyes to meet his again. "Yes." He took a slow step forward, and this time there was nowhere left to step back to, the stone behind me cool and unyielding, the rain cutting off the only escape I had not already lost. Not trapped. Not exactly. But contained. By him. "You do not stay in places like this without a reason," he said, his voice low, steady, each word placed carefully. "And you do not give answers like that without understanding what they mean." My pulse quickened, but I held his gaze, even as every part of me recognized the weight of what he was saying. "I understand." Another pause. Another shift. His expression did not change, but something deeper moved beneath it, something that felt less like observation and more like decision. His hand lifted again, slower this time, more certain, stopping just short of my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the warmth without the contact. A choice. Always a choice with him. "Do you?" he murmured, and this time there was something else in his voice, something quieter, more dangerous in its restraint. Not a threat. Not force. Something stronger. Control. The kind that did not need to prove itself. My breath caught, but I did not move. Because stepping away now would mean denying everything I had already admitted. "Yes," I said again, softer this time, but no less certain. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly. Not suddenly. But completely. Because Victor DeLuca did not hesitate after that. He closed the final space between us, not touching, not yet, but close enough that the world outside of that moment no longer existed, his presence steady, unshakable, undeniable. And when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more weight than anything he had said before. "Then you should know," he said slowly, his eyes locked on mine, "that things do not stay the same after this." My heart pounded against my chest, not from fear, not entirely, but from the understanding settling deep within me. I had wanted to be seen. I had waited for it. And now that it had happened, there was no going back. The rain did not slow, but something inside me did, like the world had narrowed to the space between his words and my heartbeat, steady but louder than it should have been, louder than I could hide, and I knew he heard it, not the sound, but the shift, the way my breathing changed when he stepped that close, when he said things did not stay the same after this, like he was not warning me but informing me, like the decision had already been made somewhere beyond my reach. I should have asked what he meant. I should have demanded distance, clarity, anything that would put space back between us, but the truth was I already understood. Men like Victor DeLuca did not speak in uncertainty. When they saw something, they claimed it, not loudly, not recklessly, but completely. His gaze remained steady on mine, not forcing, not pressing, but holding in a way that made leaving feel impossible even though no one was stopping me. "You can still walk away," he said quietly, and for a second, just a second, I almost believed it was a choice. But there was something in his eyes that told me the truth. This was not about whether I could leave. It was about whether I would. My fingers loosened slightly from the fabric of my coat, the tension I had held for years shifting into something else, something more dangerous because it was not fear. It was clarity. "No," I said, the word leaving me before I could soften it, before I could pretend otherwise. His expression did not change, but the air did again, tightening just enough to make the moment feel sealed, final. "No," he repeated, slower, as if confirming it into something permanent. Another step, smaller this time, but it erased what little distance remained until I could feel the warmth of him through the cold night air, steady, controlled, unyielding. "Then do not pretend this is something small," he said, his voice low, measured, each word deliberate. "You do not wait 7 years for something that does not matter." The truth of it hit harder than anything else he had said. Because he was right. Every quiet moment, every glance I had hidden, every reason I had told myself to stay, none of it had been small. And now it was all standing between us, exposed, undeniable. I held his gaze, even as my pulse refused to settle. I never thought it was small. His eyes searched mine again, deeper this time, not questioning, not doubting, just confirming what he already knew. And then something shifted, subtle but unmistakable, the kind of change you only noticed when it was already happening. His hand lifted again, slower now, and this time it did not stop short. His fingers brushed lightly against my wrist, not tight, not demanding, just enough to ground me in the moment, to anchor something that had been floating for too long. The contact was brief, controlled, but it sent a quiet shock through me, not from force, but from meaning. This was not accidental. Nothing about him ever was. "You understand what that means," he said softly, his voice closer now, not louder, but heavier, like it carried something beneath it that could not be ignored. My breath caught, but I did not pull away. Because pulling away would mean denying everything I had already chosen. "Yes," I answered, quieter this time, but certain. His fingers lingered for just a fraction longer before releasing, but the absence did not feel like distance. It felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. He stepped back just slightly, enough to look at me fully again, and there was something new in his expression now, something that had not been there before, not cold, not distant, but focused in a way that felt personal. Intentional. "Then listen carefully," he said, his voice returning to that calm certainty that defined him. "You do not stay where I can see you and remain untouched by my world." The words were not harsh. They were not threatening. But they carried weight, the kind that settled deep and refused to move. I felt it, every part of it, the shift from observation to decision, from distance to something far more permanent. My heart pounded, not from fear, not entirely, but from the realization that I had stepped into something I could not step out of. And yet, I did not regret it. Not even a little. Because for the first time in 7 years, I was no longer invisible. And Victor DeLuca had made it clear, he had no intention of letting me become invisible again. His words did not fade when he stepped back. They stayed, settling into the space around me, into the quiet between each breath, into the realization that nothing about this moment had been accidental. Not his questions. Not my answers. Not the way the distance between us had disappeared without either of us pretending it had not happened. I stood there, still, as the rain continued to fall just beyond the edge of the stone, the sound softer now, almost distant, like it belonged to another world I had already stepped away from. He turned slightly, not leaving, not dismissing me, just shifting his stance with that same controlled precision that defined everything he did. "You are cold," he said after a moment, his tone even, observant, as if he had catalogued the detail without effort. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was the first normal thing he had said, and even that carried weight when it came from him. "I am fine." He did not respond right away. He rarely did. Instead, his eyes moved over me again, slower this time, not searching for answers, but confirming what he already saw. "That is not the same thing," he said quietly, repeating the words from earlier, but this time they meant something different. This time they were not about being noticed. They were about being understood. My fingers loosened. Slightly at my sides, the tension shifting again, softer now, but no less real. I had spent years telling myself that distance kept things simple. That if I stayed far enough away, nothing would change. But standing here, with his attention fixed on me in a way that could not be undone, I realized simplicity had never been the truth. It had just been an illusion I held on to. "Come inside," he said, not raising his voice, not needing to. It was not a command, not exactly. But it was not something that invited refusal either. I hesitated, just for a second, not because I did not understand what it meant, but because I did. Crossing that threshold would not be the same as standing here in the quiet space between distance and decision. Inside was his world. Fully. And he had already made it clear that nothing in his world remained untouched. "Emily." My name again, softer this time, but no less certain. It pulled me back, anchored me in the moment before I could retreat into hesitation. I looked at him, really looked this time, not at the man everyone else saw, but at the one standing in front of me now, watching, waiting, not for permission, but for my choice. That was the difference. He was not forcing me forward. He was letting me step into it on my own. And somehow, that made it impossible to turn away. I nodded once, small, but deliberate. His gaze held mine for a fraction longer, then he turned, moving toward the doors with the same calm authority that shaped everything around him. He did not check if I followed. He did not need to. Because I did. The doors opened before he reached them, quiet, seamless, like the house itself responded to him without question. Warmth spilled out, soft light replacing the cold edge of the night, and for a brief second, I paused at the threshold, feeling the weight of everything I was stepping into. This was where the distance ended. This was where the lines blurred into something that could not be separated again. Behind me, the rain continued to fall, steady and familiar. In front of me, his world waited, quiet, controlled, impossible to ignore. I took a breath, then stepped inside. The doors closed behind me with a soft, final sound. And just like that, there was no outside anymore. The warmth inside did not feel comforting. It felt controlled. Intentional. Like every degree of temperature, every light, every shadow had been decided long before I stepped across that threshold. The doors closed behind me with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any sound the rain had made outside, and I felt it settle into my chest, that soft, undeniable click of something ending and something else beginning. Victor did not look back to see if I was still there. He walked forward, steady, measured, as if the space already belonged to both of us now, as if my presence behind him was no longer a question. And somehow, that made my steps quieter, more deliberate, like I was learning how to exist in a place that had never been mine before. The marble floor stretched beneath us, smooth and polished, reflecting the soft golden light from above. Everything was still. Not empty. Never empty. But quiet in a way that felt watched, like the walls held memory, like they understood more than they revealed. I had been inside this house before. Many times. But never like this. Never walking beside him. Never being seen. "You are thinking too much," he said without turning, his voice carrying easily through the silence, calm, certain. I almost stopped walking. Not because he was wrong, but because he was not supposed to know. My thoughts had always been mine. Hidden. Untouched. And yet. "I always do," I replied, my voice softer now, different in this space, like it belonged to someone I was still becoming. He slowed slightly, not stopping, just enough to acknowledge the answer, to file it somewhere I could not see. "That will change," he said, and there it was again, that quiet certainty, not forceful, not demanding, just inevitable. I frowned slightly, my steps faltering for half a second. "Why?" This time, he stopped. The movement was subtle, but it shifted everything around him, like the house itself paused in response. He turned then, finally facing me fully again, his eyes finding mine with that same unwavering focus that made it hard to look anywhere else. "Because you will not have the space to think. The way you used to," he said, his voice low, steady, but carrying something deeper beneath it. Not pressure. Not threat. Something closer to truth. My breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from the way the words settled into me, the way they felt less like prediction and more like something already decided. I stepped closer before I could stop myself, not closing the distance entirely, but enough to feel the shift again, that invisible line I had already crossed outside now following me inside. "You speak like everything is already set," I said, my voice quieter now, but steady. His gaze did not waver. Not even for a second. "It is," he replied simply. No hesitation. No doubt. Just fact. Something inside me tightened at that, not in resistance, but in recognition. Because part of me had known. From the moment he looked at me differently, from the moment he chose not to look away. This was never going to be something temporary. His hand moved again, not sudden, not unexpected anymore, just deliberate, reaching out slowly until his fingers rested lightly against my wrist once more, the same place as before, like he was confirming something that had already been claimed without needing to say it again. The contact was brief, controlled, but it anchored me in a way that made everything else feel distant. "You walked in on your own," he said softly, his eyes holding mine, not questioning, not asking, just stating what mattered. I nodded once, unable to look away. "Yes." His fingers tightened just slightly, not enough to restrain, just enough to remind. Then they released. "Then do not pretend you do not understand where you are now." The words settled between us, heavier than anything he had said before, not because of how they sounded, but because of how true they felt. I stood there, the silence stretching again, but this time it did not feel uncertain. It felt defined. Like something had been drawn clearly, permanently, and there was no mistaking it anymore. I had stepped into his world. And he had made it clear. I was not just passing through. The weight of his words did not leave when the silence returned. It stayed in the air between us, steady, unmoving. Like something that had already taken root and would not be undone by hesitation or doubt. I could feel it in the way my chest rose and fell, slower now, more deliberate, like my body was adjusting to a reality it had spent years avoiding. I had stepped into his world. That part was clear. What I had not fully understood until this moment was that his world did not have edges you could stand near without being pulled further in. Victor did not move away. He did not need to. His presence filled the space without effort, without force, simply by existing in it the way he always had, controlled, precise, undeniable. His eyes remained on mine, not searching anymore, not questioning. He already knew. That was the difference now. There was nothing left to uncover. Only something to define. "You are quiet," he said after a moment, his voice low, almost thoughtful, as if he was observing something that mattered more than it should have. I let out a small breath, steadying myself before answering. "I am thinking." He tilted his head slightly, the movement subtle but intentional, like he was considering whether that answer still applied. About leaving? The question was simple. Direct. And it landed harder than anything else had, not because of what it asked, but because of what it assumed. I shook my head slowly, the movement certain before I could second-guess it. No, his gaze did not soften, but something shifted again, deeper this time, something that felt less like control and more like acknowledgement. Good, he said quietly. Not approval. Not relief. Just confirmation. The word settled into me with unexpected weight, like it mattered more than it should have. He turned slightly then, not away from me, but enough to shift the dynamic again, to move the moment forward instead of letting it stay suspended between us. Walk with me, he said, already stepping forward, his tone leaving no space for hesitation but not forcing it either. And again, I followed. The hallway stretched ahead, long and silent, lined with soft lighting that cast more shadow than brightness, like the house itself preferred to reveal only what it chose. My steps matched his without thinking. Quieter, measured, like I was learning a rhythm that had always existed just out of reach. You have spent years watching from a distance, he said as we moved, his voice calm, even, but carrying that same quiet intensity beneath it. That distance no longer exists. I felt the truth of it settle immediately, heavy but clear. I know. He glanced at me briefly, not fully turning, just enough to confirm that I understood, that I was not pretending otherwise. Then understand this as well, he continued, his voice lowering slightly, not softer, but more focused. When something enters my world, it does not remain undefined. The words slowed my steps for a fraction of a second before I caught up again, my pulse picking up just enough to remind me that this was no longer something I could observe safely. This was something I was inside of. And what does that mean for me? I asked, my voice steady despite the way the question settled in my chest. He stopped. Not abruptly. Not sharply. Just enough to make the moment shift again, to draw my full attention without needing to ask for it. When he turned to face me, his eyes held that same unwavering focus, but now there was something else beneath it, something that felt less like observation and more like decision. It means, he said slowly, each word deliberate, precise, you do not remain unseen. My breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from the way the words echoed something I had once wanted, something I had once believed was impossible. And it means, he stepped closer again, not sudden, not overwhelming, just enough to remind me how easily the distance between us could disappear now. You do not walk away as if this never happened. The air shifted again, tighter, more defined, like the moment itself had been sealed into place. I held his gaze, steady, even as my heart refused to settle completely. Because I understood now. This was not about being noticed anymore. It was about being chosen. And Victor DeLuca did not choose things halfway. His words did not feel like an ending. They felt like the beginning of something that had already been decided long before I understood I was part of it. I stood there. Close enough to feel the quiet weight of his presence, steady, unshakable, like the foundation of everything around us, and for the first time, I was not standing at the edge of it. I was inside. Fully. There was no distance left to hide behind, no quiet corner where I could pretend this was something small or temporary. Victor did not choose things halfway. And now, he had chosen to see me. The realization did not frighten me the way it should have. It settled into me slowly, like something I had been moving toward for years without ever admitting it. I had spent so long watching him from a distance, convincing myself that was enough, that being near his world without being part of it was safe. But safety had never been what I truly wanted. I wanted this moment. Even if I had never allowed myself to say it out loud. He studied me in silence, his gaze steady, not searching anymore, not questioning. He already knew the answer to every question that mattered. What remained was what he would do with it. And what I would become because of it. You are not afraid, he said quietly, more statement than question. I considered that for a second, not rushing to answer, not pretending to feel something I did not. No, I said finally, my voice calm, honest in a way I had never allowed before. I am not. His eyes held mine, and something shifted again, subtle but undeniable, something deeper than control, something closer to understanding. That will matter, he replied, and the weight behind those words lingered longer than I expected, like a promise I did not fully understand yet. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with something steady, something that felt like the space between two decisions aligning into one. He took a step closer, not sudden, not overwhelming, just enough to remind me that distance was no longer something either of us would return to. His hand lifted again, slower this time, more certain, until his fingers brushed lightly against my jaw, not forceful, not possessive in the way I had once imagined, but deliberate, intentional, like he was confirming something real. My breath caught, but I did not move. I did not pull away. Because this was not about control. It was about recognition. You waited, he said softly, his voice lower now, closer, like the words were meant only for me. Not questioning. Not doubting. Just acknowledging what had always been there. I swallowed, my pulse steady but stronger now, no longer hidden, no longer something I tried to contain. Yes. The word was quiet, but it carried everything I had never said before. His fingers remained for a moment longer, then moved away, but the absence did not feel like distance. It felt like something had been set into place. Something that did not need to be repeated. Then you will not disappear, he said, his tone returning to that calm certainty that defined him, but now it felt different. Not distant. Not impersonal. This was directed. Chosen. I met his gaze without hesitation this time, without the instinct to look away, because there was no reason left to hide. No, I replied. Another step. Closer again. And then, finally, the words that shifted everything from possibility into something undeniable. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to carry weight without force, every syllable controlled, intentional, final. You are mine. Not loud. Not demanding. Just certain. The kind of certainty that did not ask for agreement because it already existed. My heart pounded, not from fear, not from doubt, but from the truth of it settling deep within me, undeniable in a way I could not explain. Because for years, I had belonged to this moment long before he ever saw me. And now, he knew.